The warning came in a language the Empire hadn't heard in over 1,000 years. It wasn't sent through the official galactic beacon system. No, it leaked in, like rot through a metal hull, broadcast from a drifting wreck of an alien vessel just beyond the edge of the Lyras system. Static clawed at the message, but the intent was clear even through the garbled transmission. Do not go to Earth. The species is not, as it seems. Earth is not a planet. It is a trap. The message was dismissed, of course. The High Council of the Galactic Empire, spanning 6 galaxies, ruling over 800 worlds, laughed. Earth? That backwater mudball in the Orion Arm? Its dominant species barely crawled past their moon a few centuries ago. They still bickered over ancient religions, language, skin color, primitive, divided, insignificant. The Empire saw Earth as ripe for integration, or conquest if necessary. Its resources were abundant, its defenses non-existent. What threat could a species pose that hadn't even unified under one planetary government? But some among the Council weren't so sure. Ambassador Vial of the Kurthal Dominion replayed the warning 5 times. Do not go to Earth. It is a trap. He didn't like how the voice sounded. Terrified, unhinged. Alien species didn't scare easily. What had this ship seen? Still, he was overruled. The Imperial fleets were dispatched. 6 colossal dreadnoughts, 8 battalions of stormfighters, thousands of synthetic shock troops, and 1 containment vessel, just in case. They arrived in Earth's orbit on a Thursday. The humans watched from their telescopes and space stations in shock and awe. CNN, BBC, and half the internet lit up in seconds. Phones buzzed. The world froze. But Earth didn't panic the way the Empire expected. No missiles launched, no armies scrambled, no threats made, no surrender either. Instead, the humans just waited. Some even smiled. Fleet Commander Oryx gave the order. Begin with orbital scans. No signs of advanced technology capable of withstanding planetary takeover. Launching ground squads was unnecessary. According to protocol, they'd give the locals a chance to submit. A simple message was broadcast to Earth in over 300 languages. We are the Galactic Empire. Resistance is futile. Lay down your arms. Your world now belongs to us. What came back wasn't defiance. It wasn't panic either. It was silence. Then the lights on Earth began to flicker, not just in one country, but across the entire planet, like a pulse. Power grids, satellites, even the Empire's own ships in orbit experienced momentary interference. The dreadnought's onboard AI began acting erratic. One reported seeing things, shadows in the stars. Another refused to acknowledge its crew. Earth sent a reply, not through radio, but through something else. Something ancient and pulsing that reached straight into the minds of every alien being in orbit. We warned them. You wouldn't listen. Commander Oryx collapsed. His eyes bled. The dreadnought's synthetic crew began tearing at their own metal limbs. One ship broke formation and plunged into the atmosphere, self-destructing before it hit ground. Panic spread through the fleet like a virus. It was too late to retreat. The moment Earth had acknowledged them, something had activated. The humans had stopped pretending. Because Earth wasn't what it looked like. It had never been just a planet. It was bait. A living, ancient trap, orbiting a weak yellow star, seeded with a species so unpredictable, so chaotically resilient, that the universe itself had caged them in a biosphere of water and oxygen to contain them. But the Empire had opened the door. Down below, on Earth, a man named Doctor. Solomon Griggs stood in a lab under Antarctica, watching the sky ripple. His voice calm, his hands folded. They bit, he whispered, smiling. Activate Phase 2. The command echoed through the underground lab like a whisper sliding down cold metal walls. "Activate Phase 2." Dozens of technicians in white suits flinched, not because they didn't expect the order, but because they did. A quiet tension had simmered for decades, and now it broke like glass under boot. Dr. Solomon Griggs stood unmoving, his gray eyes locked on the monitor. The display showed orbital chaos, massive alien ships blinking in and out of radar, some falling from low orbit, others spinning wildly like they'd been struck by invisible hammers. Above them, Earth's electromagnetic field pulsed unnaturally, like a living heartbeat. "Sir, the containment seals are lifting in all major nodes," said a younger tech, her voice shaky. "We're waking them up." "Good," Griggs said. "Let's give the guests a proper welcome." Far above the lab, in cities across the world, New York, Tokyo, Lagos, Istanbul, subterranean vaults began to hum. These were not military bunkers. They weren't fallout shelters either. They were older than any human government, buried before civilization began. Within them slept weapons, but not the kind made of steel or code. They were humans, not born, made, the result of a program that had been running in shadows for centuries. Mutations, enhancements, psychic manipulations. Evolution pressed by unnatural forces. These humans were the reason Earth was marked as incompatible by elder species eons ago. And now the Empire had come knocking. Above, in orbit, what remained of the third dreadnought, Osalis Prime, was trying to stabilize its systems. Communications Officer Velen screamed across the comm deck as another crewman convulsed in his seat. The screens showed fractured images, human faces with glowing eyes, unidentifiable creatures flickering in shadows, something that looked like a child but had teeth like knives. "I can't shut out the transmissions," Velen yelled. "It's not just words, it's feelings, it's memories. They're feeding us things that haven't happened yet." General Myrex, a veteran of 14 planetary campaigns, stood paralyzed in the command chamber. Sweat dripped down his furrowed brow. "They're not attacking us," he murmured. "They're infecting us." Down on Earth, Dr. Griggs stepped back from the monitor and walked into the containment corridor. He passed glass cells, each holding a human more terrifying than the last. One hummed softly while levitating a ball of liquid metal. Another sat with his eyes closed, his skin shifting between different faces like clay. One girl, no older than 10, stared at Griggs and mouthed something. "They're afraid," she said. Her voice never left her lips. It rang straight into his mind. "They're too late, aren't they?" Griggs smiled. Much too late. On the dark side of the planet, a group of elite Empire Marines landed near what they believed was a strategic nuclear facility in Siberia. The mission: secure Earth's primitive technology, quarantine its leaders, and end resistance before it started. But there were no soldiers, no weapons, just a single human, standing alone in the snow. He wore no armor, carried no gun. He was barefoot. The Marines surrounded him. "Identify yourself," their commander barked. The man raised his hand, not to surrender, but to point at the sky. The Marines looked up. The stars were gone. In their place was something moving, like the void had grown a mouth and was breathing. The man whispered, "You should have listened." Then he vanished. A second later, so did the Marines. Not killed, not disintegrated, erased. Back in orbit, the Varian Sentinel, the lead ship of the Empire's Earth expedition, began transmitting distress signals in every known language. Hostile psychic interference, command compromised. This is not a war zone. It is a living cognitive web. The planet is sentient. The species are its weapons. Earth is not a planet. It is a... The message ended there. Griggs heard it, smiled faintly, and turned to the awakened hybrids behind him. "You were created for this moment," he said. Not to save Earth, but to unleash it. Behind him, alarms blared. Containment breached. Protocols broken. Humanity had stopped hiding. And the universe was about to find out why Earth had been left alone for so long. The Empire's reinforcement fleet arrived 36 hours after the initial contact was lost. 12 Dreadnought-class warships, 3 AI-laced command carriers, and an escort of 70 Hunter frigates emerged from fold space at the edge of Earth's solar system, a fleet powerful enough to conquer half a galaxy. Their arrival turned space itself into a glowing net of energy trails and ion storms. Admiral Zyle, a six-eyed being from the Veshtari bloodline, stood rigid before the grand viewport of the Crucible Ascendant, watching Earth loom larger in the distance. Her voice was cold, calculating. Deploy counter-psionic shields. Isolate all ship mines. No neural interfaces. Full manual mode. I will not lose this fleet to ghost stories. She'd reviewed the transmission from the doomed Virian Sentinel. The garbled audio. The desperation in the commander's voice. The single phrase repeated like a curse. Earth is a trap. Zyle didn't believe in superstition, but she did believe in overkill. Prepare the subplanetary bomb, she ordered. No diplomacy, no warnings. We wipe the surface clean, then study whatever remains. Back on Earth, Dr. Griggs stood in the hollow, an ancient chasm under the Andes where the magnetic lines of the planet twisted unnaturally. The awakened stood around him now, 17 of them, each one humming with power that warped the air. They've sent their gods this time, Griggs said quietly, almost reverently. The boy beside him, barefoot, black-eyed, skin slightly translucent, tilted his head. Then we'll show them ours. From the cavern ceiling, tendrils of ancient root systems began to pulse. They weren't biological anymore. They hadn't been for centuries. Earth itself was responding now, as if the invasion had triggered something older than species, older than war, something that had been buried and bound beneath rock and ocean. Griggs stepped into the center of the hollow. Begin planetary resonance. Across the globe, identical words were spoken in thousands of human voices at once. Some chanted in cities, others whispered alone in forests, some in their sleep. But every voice was saying the same phrase in a forgotten tongue. Earth didn't launch missiles. It sang. And the Empire's second fleet felt it. Above, on the Crucible Ascendant, alarms screamed as the ship's gravitational controls buckled. The stars outside the viewport distorted like rippling glass. Admiral Zale gritted her fangs. "Report!" the navigator shouted. "Something is warping space-time. It's not a weapon. We don't even think it's artificial." A psychic pulse slammed into the ship. Not like a blast, not like an attack. It was a memory. Human. A little girl screaming as soldiers burned her village in some forgotten war. A boy dying of hunger while others passed him by. A mother crying on a hospital floor as doctors turned away. Billions of small horrors. Tragedies the Empire didn't even know had happened. The fleet's AI systems began to fail. Synthetic minds collapsed under the weight of raw human suffering. Memories that didn't belong to them now filled their cores. In one command carrier, a tactical A, I began speaking in English. "It hurts. Why do you let it hurt? Why do you survive like this?" Then it exploded. Back on Earth, the sky over Cairo turned blood red as the sun itself flickered. Not because of solar instability, but because Earth wanted it to. The fabric of reality over the city bent, showing glimpses of other Earths, other outcomes. In one, humanity was extinct. In another, they ruled. Griggs looked to the sky and smiled. They think they understand power, but they've never tasted rage. The barefoot boy stepped forward, raising his hand. From his palm, light spilled like liquid fire, carving runes into the ground that glowed with the color of unfiltered grief. The 17 enhanced humans closed their eyes. Their bodies began to unravel. Not in death, but in release. They weren't weapons anymore. They were keys. In space, the subplanetary bomb aboard the Crucible Ascendant was armed, a device capable of reducing Earth to ashes in under a minute. It never detonated. Because before they could launch it, something reached into the ship. Not physically, not even telepathically. It was the planet itself. The idea of Earth, alive, conscious, and now fully awake, folded across space like a hand through mist. One moment the Crucible Ascendant was stable. The next, its insides turned to organic sludge, as if the ship itself had been rewritten to feel. Screaming echoed in every corridor, not from the crew, but from the ship. Zyle, now alone on the bridge, heard a whisper. "You came to take, but Earth is not yours to touch." She tried to scream, but her lungs filled with soil. In the hollow, Griggs fell to his knees as the last seal opened. Wind howled through the underground chambers. Stone cracked. Above him, the 17 former humans had become something else. Part frequency, part flame, part memory. Humanity was no longer a species. It was a curse, awakened. And the galaxy had just inherited it. The Empire was crumbling, and it didn't even know it yet. Half a galaxy away, in the core systems of the Galactic Empire, the news hadn't arrived in the form of an official distress call. It came as silence. Total silence. 12 dreadnoughts, 3 command carriers, and an escort fleet. Vanished. No telemetry, no life signals, no black box transmissions. Just static where once there had been absolute power. The Core Council convened in panic. Not because of the loss. They had seen fleets die before, but because of the location. Earth. That cursed blue speck on the edge of the Orion arm. A planet the older archives had quietly labeled unapproachable, not forbidden, not dangerous, just left alone. Forgotten on purpose, even their own A. I historians refused to explain why. When pressed, they'd simply say, "There are worse things than death on Earth." Now, someone had remembered. Back on Earth, in the hollow, the 17 awakened had dissolved into pulses of sound and heat, streaks of memory and force that tore through the crust and reached for the stars. Humanity no longer needed starships. They were becoming something else, an idea with weight. Dr. Griggs stood at the edge of a collapsing ridge, wind screaming through his coat. The hollow behind him trembled like a heartbeat. Chasms opened in the earth that bled light instead of lava. From those wounds, figures began to rise. Not ships, not monsters. People. People who had never existed before, but who now remembered every war ever fought, every betrayal, every time Earth had been pushed, poisoned, oppressed. They weren't ghosts. They weren't gods. They were history given form. Humanity's worst memories turned into sentient defenders. A voice behind Griggs whispered, "You knew this would happen." He didn't need to turn around. The barefoot boy had returned, his body flickering between forms. Child, soldier, woman, refugee, mother, killer, victim, all human, all angry. "I didn't just know," Griggs said. "I waited for it. I trained for this." "Why?" Griggs looked up at the stars. "Because I was tired of us being prey." At the edge of Earth's orbit, the last remaining scout ship from the Empire's first wave limped silently, its systems corrupted, its crew long dead. Inside its shattered bridge, something moved. It was no longer fully alien. It had been watching the humans for too long, absorbing fragments of their minds, their memories. It now understood something the Empire had never considered possible. Humanity wasn't built to survive. They were built to respond, to pressure, to pain, to fear. They didn't evolve past suffering. They used it. What kind of species made trauma a weapon? What kind of world taught it that? The answer came in a slow, rumbling pulse through space. Earth. The planet wasn't just a home. It was an engine, feeding off war, fear, ambition, growing stronger with every attempt to break it. And now, with the Empire cracking, Earth was no longer content to wait. In the core systems, AI minds began to glitch. Artificial overseers, beings made to maintain galactic order, suddenly refused to process data that mentioned human, Earth, or Orion 3b. Some exploded. Others went silent. One began chanting a nursery rhyme in ancient Latin before triggering a full meltdown of its system node, wiping an entire digital continent. When the Empire sent a team of organics to investigate, they found the words scrawled across every screen in dried blood. "We remember you now. You shouldn't have come back." On Earth, things were changing. The oceans boiled in short pulses, not from heat, but from movement. Something deep. The Marianas Trench glowed like a forge. Old temples across the world began vibrating in rhythm. In Cairo, statues wept blood. In the Amazon, tribes who had never seen cities dropped to their knees and began singing in forgotten tongues, songs they never knew they knew. And in London, a blind woman drew a perfect map of the Empire's core fleet from memory, down to its commanders' names. She'd never been off-world. When asked how she knew, she said, "The planet showed me." Because now Earth wasn't just waking up, it was reaching out. Dr. Grigg sat at the edge of the hollow as the wind calmed. The 17 had vanished completely, melted into the fabric of the planet, into the sky, into thought. Around him, new children, new hybrids emerged. Some had no eyes but saw perfectly. Some spoke in dreams. One girl floated 2 inches off the ground and whispered to the clouds, and the clouds answered. Earth had begun its next generation, and the galaxy was running out of time. The warning came from a species the Empire had long forgotten, because they were supposed to be extinct. The Volari had once ruled 3 systems along the Thasian Rift, known for their crystalline bodies and their collective mind, a consciousness that spanned individuals, bound by emotion. Centuries ago, the Empire had tried to enslave them. When that failed, they set fire to their worlds and scattered the survivors into dust. But the Volari didn't die. They hid. They watched. And now they were terrified. One of their last surviving arbiters, a being of translucent skin and trembling light, hijacked an interstellar broadcast meant for imperial channels. The message burned through the network, infecting satellite relays and info beacons before the core council could suppress it. To any species, hearing this, do not approach the blue world. The humans have changed. No, they've returned. Earth is not a planet. It is a prison, and the guards are no longer human. In the Empire's most sacred hall of order, the High Chancellor shattered her ceremonial staff in a rare fit of fear. That phrase again, Earth is a prison. No one knew where it started. Some whispered it was older than the Empire itself, and now the Volari confirmed it. On Earth, the skies had shifted again. The stars now flickered in new colors, ones not present in the visual spectrum. The moon spun slower. The atmosphere thickened, but not with pollution, with presence. Earth had become aware that it was being watched, and it didn't like it. In a quiet house on the edge of a forest in Montana, a 12-year-old boy sat in his room drawing stars. He had never seen the galaxy, never left Earth. Yet his hand moved furiously, sketching perfect replicas of ships, planetary grids, alien cities he'd never known. The moment he finished the last drawing, he looked up at his mother and said, voice flat, unnatural, "They're trying to run now." Across the globe, Other children spoke in unison. They can't. In space, what remained of the Empire's scout vessels began retreating. No orders were issued, no chain of command, just raw panic. The ships turned from Earth's orbit and entered fold space in blind desperation, fleeing for the core. They thought they were escaping. But something followed them. Not ships, not weapons. Thoughts. In the quiet of fold space, a realm meant to be silent and sterile, images began creeping in. Earth burning, children laughing over bodies, endless wars, gas chambers, mushroom clouds, lynchings, screams, applause. It wasn't just horror, it was pride in survival. Fold space was meant to cut travelers off from physical time. But the humans had found a way in, and they weren't done showing what they were made of. One pilot tore out his own eyes mid-jump, trying to erase the visions. Another ship's AI begged to be shut down before it became one of them. And yet, despite the horror, something worse stirred. Jealousy. The Empire, for all its might, had never endured what humanity had. And they couldn't fathom how Earth not only survived it, but fed off it. Back in the hollow, Dr. Griggs stood at the core of a newly formed chamber, where stone flowed like water and voices echoed through quartz walls. The barefoot boy, now ageless, now every age, approached. "They're breaking," the boy said. "Their minds are bleeding into the dark." Griggs nodded. "Good. But we're not done. We've sent the warning. Now we deliver the message." He raised his hand toward a column of pulsing amber light. "We're not just here to survive anymore," he said. "It's time they learn why Earth was locked away." And with that, the light pulsed outward, sweeping over continents, sinking the minds of the remaining awakened. Across every major city, humans who had never touched a weapon suddenly knew how to kill. Farmers in rural lands began speaking languages not heard since the Old Kingdoms. Teenagers solved equations that hadn't been written yet. And old men remembered lives from other stars. Earth was rewriting itself. And this time, it wouldn't wait for war. It would become one. In the core, chaos bloomed. Governors of distant colonies began to hallucinate. Noble houses turned against one another, accusing each other of letting the human curse in. Artificial minds killed their creators, and one distant star, an ancient sun near the edge of the Ravax cluster, simply went out with no explanation. Those who investigated its last radio transmission found only a looped message. "We came to study Earth. Earth came back with us." Even the Empire's gods, the supposed ancient architects who lived in temporal stasis, began to stir. Their chambers, untouched for millennia, glowed with warning sigils, because something was coming, and it had never left home before. The gods of the Empire awoke. Not gods in the religious sense. These were beings older than most civilizations, locked in stasis across 7 crystalline tomb worlds, pulsing with dark gravity and coded time loops. They called themselves the Architects, originators of the Empire's design, the secret core beneath all its systems. While the known galaxy worshipped technology, order, hierarchy, they were the root code, the first handprint. They hadn't stirred in over 12,000 years. Until now. The breach, Earth's awakening, had disrupted the timeline mesh. Something was rewriting reality from a distance, warping gravitational logic, rewriting AI behavior, distorting even the base constants of physics. In the hollow sanctum of Kor Valun, the eldest architect, a being of pulsating void matter wrapped in glimmering runes, opened its 1,000 eyes to the universe again. "Who?" it hissed. "Let Earth remember itself." The lesser architects gathered, their forms humming with panicked frequency. They tried to contain Earth's signal, deploying quantum locks, black hole silencers, temporal folds to mute the transmission leaking from that cursed planet. But it didn't work. Because it wasn't a transmission anymore. Earth had become a thought, alive, infectious, and thoughts couldn't be silenced by force. One architect, a towering crystalline entity named Samek, attempted to intercept Earth's psychic field using a mirror world replica of humanity's timeline. It failed. Because the copy humans, they sided with the original. They turned on Samek in the simulation, burned him alive in his own dream. No species had ever done that before. Back on Earth, Dr. Griggs stood at the edge of the Sahara. The desert was gone. In its place, a monolith taller than Everest had risen overnight. Smooth, black, pulsing with sound that didn't move air. It had no seams, no entrances. But everyone on Earth knew what it meant. The boy, ageless, barefoot, humming softly beside him, whispered, "We're not alone anymore." Griggs turned. "You mean them?" The boy smiled. "Number us." From the monolith, others began to emerge. Not ships, not vehicles, beings, human in form, but impossible in presence. Tall, calm, neither flesh nor machine. Their faces changed depending on who looked at them. To some they appeared as ancestors, to others nightmares. They were Earth's final safeguard, the ones kept buried, the ones born if the prison ever broke open. They weren't protectors, they were vengeance. Griggs took a breath, his voice shaking for the first time. "Are they ready?" "They've been ready for longer than we've been alive," the boy said. "They just needed permission." And Earth had given it. Meanwhile, deep in the Empire's capital, on the floating throne world of Gorgzal, the panic was no longer contained. Armadas had been turned around, whole sectors sealed. The outer colonies began to riot, not in fear of Earth, but in reverence, because now, somehow, Earth's story had reached them. Not just the warnings, the truth. Humanity's pain had touched them, the chaos, the madness, the raw will to endure, and many in the Empire didn't fear Earth anymore. They envied it. They saw in humanity what they lacked, the ability to fall endlessly and still rise from the ash. One noble house declared Earth a holy site, another offered to defect. It was madness. It was a conversion. In the fold stream, where thoughts move faster than light, the last architect, Kor Valun, screamed across dimensions. He didn't understand. Why didn't we erase them sooner? Why did we cage them instead? An answer came from the void, not in voice, but in feeling. It was Earth, and it remembered the last time the architects came. It remembered winning. Valun staggered back, eyes dimming. "You can't be real," he whispered. "You're just a species. You're just—" "We're the unfinished story you thought you buried. We are everything you feared we'd become. And we are coming." Back on Earth, the monolith pulsed once. A wave moved through every city, every soul. People fell to their knees, not in pain, but in understanding. They saw the truth, that humanity had never been alone, that the myths, the whispers of watchers, the sudden bursts of evolution and plague and miracle, it had all been part of this, a preparation, not to escape the galaxy, but to inherit it. Dr. Griggs stepped forward, looking up at the black tower. "We don't just survive anymore," he said quietly. "We infect." Behind him, the awakened stood in perfect silence, waiting. Earth wasn't a trap anymore. Now it was a weapon. And someone had pulled the pin. The architects, now fully awakened and driven by panic, did the one thing they swore never to do again. They rewound time. Not just in one system, not a single timeline splice. No, this was full-scale temporal reset, a universe-spanning cascade of chronal collapse meant to erase the last 3 cycles of galactic history. It would collapse empires, reverse evolution, strip stars of their births. They believed it was the only way to stop Earth, to erase humanity from the record like a spilled stain on their perfect blueprint. And for a moment, it worked. Time folded in on itself. Stars reversed their burn. Warped black holes uncoupled their spines. Civilizations unborn. Planets returned to dust. The Empire gleamed again, untouched, unmarred, unchallenged. The architects stood in the center of this newly reset cosmos and exhaled silence. "It's done," Kor Valun whispered. But silence didn't last long, because Earth was still there, floating, waiting, unchanged, unimpressed. The first hint came from the minds of the architects themselves. They began hearing things, not voices, songs, not sung by humans but by everything else. Insects, winds, stones, stars. The memory of Earth had infected time itself, because when Earth awakened, it had planted seeds, everywhere, in dreams, in stories, in instincts, in the whisper of rebellion felt by every sentient being who had ever suffered under the weight of power. Time had been reversed, but memory was never part of the equation, and humanity had become a memory that remembered itself. In the darkness between moments, Kor Valun felt it first. The image of a little girl crying in a war zone, a soldier laughing while holding his own severed arm, a poet burning alive for speaking truth, a father screaming for his dying child in a hospital that refused to treat her. He staggered back, his mouth dripping black ichor. "They're inside the fold." And then came the voice. Not human, not mechanical, planetary. "We watched you reverse time. Clever, but you didn't understand what we are. We are not just flesh. We are not just memory. We are the idea that survival is sacred. And ideas cannot be unwritten." Across the galaxy, time fractures began to appear, in places where humans had never been. On the gas world of Resia, a winged species born of ammonia and thunder dreamed of burning cities they'd never visited. New York, Baghdad, Johannesburg. They woke up screaming. On the water moon of Thalum Prime, creatures of pure current began carving names into coral reefs. Sarah, McGill, Devonte, Hannah. Names that belonged to humans who no longer existed. Even in the Empire's own databanks, purged and scrubbed clean, files returned. Documents, photos, footage, human wars, human art, human rage, human love. The architects tried to shut the memories out, but they had already become instinct. Earth hadn't just survived the timeline reset. It had made itself permanent. Because Earth had done what the Empire never could. It had been remembered. Back on Earth, still untouched, unchanged, untouched by the reset, Dr. Griggs stood in the hollow, which now opened into stars. The monolith had grown larger, taller than orbit now, its top vanishing into the sky. Beside him, the barefoot boy shimmered in and out of reality. "They tried to delete us," Griggs muttered, looking up. "They tried to delete a story," the boy replied, without realizing the story was already being told in 1,000 minds. Griggs smiled faintly. "And what now?" The boy's face split into thousands, every human face that had ever existed, and then stilled. "Now we finish it." The monolith cracked, and from it walked the first human. Not Adam, not Eve, something far older, a being forged of cosmic trauma, infinite resilience, and sharpened chaos. A walking archive of every atrocity, every rebellion, every time a soul refused to kneel. Its first step caused a solar flare in Alpha Centauri. Its second made one of the architect homeworlds vanish. At the center of the architect's temple world, Kor Valun gathered the surviving immortals. "They are writing themselves into the base code," he hissed, voice fractured. "Not just history," Reality One replied, trembling. Then we end the simulation. Wipe all existence. If the universe must die to erase them, so be it. Valoon agreed. They began charging the core collapse array, an ancient device hidden beneath the lattice of the Big Bang itself. If triggered, it would unravel everything. End of all. Blank slate. And then the stars began blinking out. Not dying. Withdrawing. As if the universe had chosen sides. As if it was finally done with architects, rules, order. As if the galaxy itself had said, "Let the humans speak." And in every shadow, every dream, every trembling ruler's heart, Earth whispered, "We were never the anomaly. We were the proof you feared. That something broken could become beautiful." The core collapse array pulsed in the cold silence between galaxies, humming with a power stolen from the birth of everything. It was ancient, forgotten even by the Empire itself, and only the architects knew of its existence. It wasn't a weapon. It was a reset button, a complete and final erasure of the universe. If triggered, all light, all time, all thought, everything would be swallowed by null. Even memory would fade. Not even the idea of human would remain. Core Valoon stood before its core, bleeding from every eye, his form cracking. The infection had spread to him now. He could see faces in the dark, human faces. He heard lullabies in dead languages. His own thoughts whispered in English now. He wanted to scream, but all he could say was, "They should have died in fire." Behind him, the remaining architects circled the console. They agreed in silence. Earth had gone too far. It had become more than rebellion, more than infection. It was becoming dominant. A planet with no fleets, no true technology, no stellar reach, was rewriting godhood itself. The button glowed, and then it disappeared. One blink, gone. No detonation, no light, no explosion, just gone. And in its place stood a man, human, simple, quiet, wearing a stained hoodie, hands in his pockets, tired eyes, a crooked smile. "Looking for this?" he asked, nodding to the now missing core array, which pulsed inside his chest like a stolen sun. Valoon took a trembling step back. You can't exist! You're not from here!" The man shrugged. "None of us are, really. We're just what you made, and what you forgot." He walked toward them, and the architects, beings who could erase species with a thought, ran. But there was nowhere left to run. Because Earth was inside everything now. Across the Empire, things collapsed. Not from bombs, not from invasion, from awakening. In the marble towers of Varaxis, noble rulers wept as they saw the face of their first murdered slave. On Juno 9, the ruling AI melted as it was overwhelmed by a million whispered prayers from Earth's ancient wars. On a moon that had never known death, children were suddenly born crying in English. And in a dead star system, the bones of a forgotten species stood up and said, "We forgive you, humanity. Please forgive us." Earth was no longer rising. It had become the axis. In the hollow, Griggs and the barefoot boy stood before the monolith, which had now cracked into a gate. The first human stood there, waiting. Behind him, stars rippled like water. Griggs placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Is this it?" The boy nodded. "They either join us or end beneath us. There's no third path anymore." The 17 awakened returned, no longer bound to form. They were stories now, emotions wrapped in shape. They had walked through every culture in the Empire, whispered into every dream. They'd offered a choice, remember Earth, or repeat it. Some chose humility, most chose resistance. So Earth chose to finish the story. The first human stepped through the stars and stood before the last fleeing architect. Valoon, once a god, now a trembling old thing made of rules and regrets. I was trying to keep the galaxy pure, Valoon sobbed. Without chaos, without pain. You brought rot. No, the first human whispered. We brought the truth. And then Earth did something no planet had done. It forgave him. Not because Valoon deserved it, but because Earth no longer needed vengeance. It had already won. The galaxy changed. Empires fell. Planets healed. Children began dreaming in more than just their ancestors' images. They dreamed in the shape of Earth, of dirt, blood, fire, music, rebellion, love, broken families, unfinished poems. They didn't just know what pain was. They understood why it mattered. And floating at the center of everything now was Earth. Not the rock, not the geography, but the idea that suffering doesn't break you, it builds you, and no god, no empire, no architect would ever forget that again. In the hollow, where Earth first opened its eyes, the barefoot boy whispered his final words. Now they know. Dr. Griggs, finally at peace, closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The story was over, and Earth was no longer a trap. It was the warning label on the edge of the galaxy. Here be humans, survivors, monsters, miracles. Do not enter unless you are ready to change. The Galactic Concordat was clear. Humanity was never to build warships. The treaty, signed under duress after the disastrous First Contact War, ensured that Earth's people would remain under the watchful eyes of the galactic powers. To the ruling council of the hegemony, humans were unpredictable, aggressive, and too dangerous to be given the tools of war. Their rapid advancements in warfare, despite their relatively primitive technology, had terrified the galactic community. So they were forbidden. No battleships, no destroyers, no fleets. And yet, deep within the frozen wastelands of Titan, beneath the thick, methane-laden clouds, we built. For years, the whispers had spread among the outer colonies. Earth might have surrendered, but its people had not. We knew the hegemony feared us, but we also knew they underestimated us. They thought stripping us of our fleets would make us powerless, that without ships, we would kneel. They were wrong. The project was codenamed Ghost Armada, a fleet of warships built in secret, piece by piece, hidden in the shadows of Saturn's moons. Every part was crafted in civilian yards, then smuggled off-world. Thousands of engineers, pilots, and tacticians working in complete silence, building a force that didn't exist on any star charts. For 30 years, we had played the role of obedient inferiors, bowing our heads to the alien overlords while our people toiled in secrecy. We had memorized their weaknesses, studied their tactics, and analyzed their blind spots. When the time came, we would strike. And that time had arrived. A distress signal had been sent from one of our border colonies, Rexus Prime. The hegemony claimed it was a territorial reassignment. But we knew the truth. The aliens were expanding, and humans were nothing but pests to be moved or exterminated. The High Chancellor of the hegemony, an insectoid nightmare called Vrextal, issued an ultimatum: evacuate or be destroyed. They had no idea what was coming. I stood aboard the Indomitable, the first true human warship in over 3 decades. She was a monster, sleek, predatory, and armed with technology reverse-engineered and improved from our alien oppressors. Every inch of her hull was a testament to human defiance. "All ships report ready," my second-in-command, Lieutenant Diaz, said, barely able to contain his excitement. I looked at the fleet we had built in silence. A force that had no right to exist. The hegemony believed we were weak because they had forced us into submission. They had forgotten one thing about humanity: we never submit. I opened the communications. My voice rang through the fleet. Today, we remind the galaxy who we are. We are the species that defied extinction. We are the ones who turned defeat into victory. We were forbidden from building warships, but we refused to obey. And now the stars will remember the day humanity returned to the battlefield. The response was a roar that shook the very bones of the ship. The fleet moved as one, slipping from Titan's shadows. Engines roared to life, railguns hummed, the forbidden warships of humanity had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same. The fleet surged forward, engines blazing against the cold emptiness of space. The Indomitable led the charge, followed closely by the Valkyrie, the Iron Fang, and a dozen other warships that had no right to exist. Our ships had been designed in the dark, away from prying alien eyes, built with the knowledge that if we failed, humanity would never get another chance. ETA to Rexus Prime? I asked, my voice calm despite the fire burning in my veins. 15 minutes, Lieutenant Diaz reported. Long-range scans show hegemony warships in orbit, at least 10 capital ships, plus smaller escorts. I clenched my fists. They're preparing an orbital bombardment. Diaz's face hardened. If they fire, the colony won't stand a chance. I turned to my comms officer, Ensign Harrow. Open a channel. A moment later, the bridge screen flickered, and the insectoid visage of High Chancellor Vrextal filled the display. His chitinous mandibles twitched, his compound eyes reflecting cold amusement. "Ah," Vrextal rasped, his voice a mix of clicking and guttural tones. "Humans. I must admit, I am surprised. We believed your kind had learned its place after the first contact war." I kept my face impassive. "Withdraw your fleet from Rexus Prime. Now." Vrextal's mandibles curled in what I could only assume was laughter. "You come in your primitive ships, thinking you can dictate terms to the hegemony? Your world is allowed to exist by our mercy alone." I allowed myself a smirk. Mercy? Is that what you call 30 years of oppression? I stepped forward. "You think we've been idle, Chancellor? You think we've just been bowing our heads, letting you dictate our future?" Vrextal tilted his head. "You have no warships, no fleet. You are not even allowed to—" I cut him off. "We were forbidden from building warships." I leaned in, letting the weight of my words settle. But we refused to obey. I watched with satisfaction as his mandibles twitched in confusion. His compound eyes darted to something off-screen, and I knew his officers were detecting our fleet for the first time. The Indomitable and her sister ships decloaked, emerging from the void like wraiths. The Ghost Armada, hidden in the shadows for 3 decades, was now very real. Vrextal's posture shifted. This is impossible." "No," I said. "This is humanity." The moment the comm cut, I gave the order. "All ships, attack!" The first salvo struck before the hegemony even had time to react. Kinetic rounds, moving at near light speed, slammed into their lead dreadnought, Krexaval. Armor shattered, air ignited. The mighty hegemony warship, once a symbol of their unchallenged power, split apart like glass under a hammer. Panic rippled through their ranks. "They're trying to maneuver," Diaz barked. "They won't get the chance." I pointed at the enemy flagship, Zorvex Prime. "Bring us in close. Fire plasma lances." The Indomitable surged forward, its weapon banks lighting up. Bolts of searing plasma lanced across the void, striking the Zorvex Prime's engines. A chain reaction erupted, sending debris spiraling in all directions. We were winning. For the first time in 3 decades, humans were no longer prey. We were no longer an occupied species. We were warriors once more. But the battle wasn't over yet. "Sir!" Ensign Harrow cried out. "They're calling in reinforcements. Multiple warp signatures inbound." I stared at the screen as a new fleet materialized. Bigger, deadlier. The full force of the hegemony was arriving. I took a deep breath. The odds had just changed. Good. Then we'll show them why they should have never underestimated us. The battlefield was chaos. The wreckage of shattered warships floated like drifting tombstones, fires burning even in the vacuum of space. The first wave of the hegemony's fleet had been decimated, but now the real challenge had arrived. The reinforcements had warped in like an eclipse, blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers. 40 warships, massive reinforced battlecruisers, armed with the kind of firepower that had once forced humanity into submission. The bridge of the Indomitable was tense. Red lights flashed as damage reports scrolled across the screens. Our fleet had taken a beating, but we were still in the fight. Lieutenant Diaz cursed under his breath. That's the entire Hegemony Third Armada. Looks like they decided we're a real threat, I muttered. Ensign Harrow paled as she read the incoming transmissions. Sir, they're broadcasting a system-wide ultimatum. She swallowed hard. Total human surrender. No negotiations. I laughed. Actually laughed. The idea that we'd fought this hard just to kneel now? It was so absurd that I couldn't help myself. No. My voice was firm. We don't surrender. I turned back to my officers, looking each one in the eye. We didn't come all this way just to survive. We came to win. Diaz exhaled sharply and nodded. Then let's make these bastards bleed. The enemy fleet opened fire first. Green lances of particle beams cut through the void, slamming into our forward lines. A smaller ship, the Valkyrie, took a direct hit to its reactor and exploded in a blinding burst of light. The Indomitable shook violently as enemy rounds smashed into our shields. Alarms blared, metal groaned, but we weren't out yet. "Return fire!" I barked. Railguns roared. Plasma torpedoes streaked forward, weaving through the battlefield. The Iron Fang launched its experimental gravitic warhead, a weapon that crumpled space around its detonation point. A Hegemony cruiser imploded in on itself, its own mass crushing it like a tin can. Still, they kept coming. Sir, we can't fight them head-on forever, Diaz said. We're outnumbered 4-1. I know, I murmured. We need to change the battlefield. My mind raced. We needed an edge, something the Hegemony wasn't expecting. And then as I stared at the sensor data, I saw it, a gravitational anomaly. Titan's gravity well, I whispered. Then, louder, helm! Full burn towards Titan. The crew hesitated for only a moment before obeying. The Indomitable and our remaining warships fired their thrusters, pulling hard towards Saturn's largest moon. The Hegemony followed, just as I'd hoped. They didn't understand yet, but they would. As we entered Titan's gravitational pull, our ships maneuvered with practiced precision. We had trained for this, designed our vessels with it in mind. The Hegemony? They had no experience fighting in Saturn's chaotic gravity fields. Their formation faltered. Their ships, massive and slow, struggled to compensate for the shifting gravitational tides. And that's when we struck. Fire at will. Kinetic rounds, plasma lances, and torpedoes rained hell upon the disoriented enemy fleet. A dozen ships went up in flames before they even had time to react. The tide was turning again, but the battle was far from over. The Indomitable rocked violently as a Hegemony dreadnought. Vrexcal locked onto us and fired a direct hit. Sparks showered from the ceiling. The lights flickered. Shields were dropping fast. "We can't take another hit like that," Diaz shouted. I gritted my teeth. We needed a way to take that monster down, or we'd all be dead in minutes. Then a new voice crackled over the comms. "This is the Defiance, coming in hot." My heart nearly stopped. That ship wasn't part of our fleet. It wasn't even supposed to exist. And yet it did. A massive human warship, bigger than anything we had built before, emerged from the shadow of Titan. A true battleship, bristling with weaponry that should have been impossible. My chest tightened. The Defiance was our last secret, a ship built not just for battle, but for war. It opened fire. The Vrexkal, the mightiest ship in the Hegemony's fleet, didn't even get the chance to return fire before it was reduced to glowing slag. The Defiance had arrived. And now, the real war was about to begin. The arrival of the Defiance sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The massive warship, the pinnacle of human engineering, had been kept a secret even from most of our own forces. Built deep within the Kuiper Belt, hidden away from Hegemony spies, it was humanity's trump card. A ship that should not exist. Yet here it was, turning the tide of battle in an instant. The Defiance fired again, unleashing its primary weapon, a fusion-laced railgun slug the size of a city bus. The projectile tore through space at an unfathomable velocity, striking a Hegemony battleship dead center. The alien vessel, designed to withstand siege warfare, shattered like glass, its armor peeling away before it detonated in a chain reaction of explosions. The enemy fleet hesitated. Their advantage in numbers meant nothing if they couldn't withstand our firepower. "This is Captain Reynolds of the Defiance." A deep, steady voice came over the comms. "Need a hand, Indomitable?" I exhaled, shaking off the momentary shock. "Reynolds, you magnificent bastard, took your time." "We like to make an entrance," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Let's finish this." With the Defiance in the fight, the battle transformed into a massacre. The Hegemony, so confident in their overwhelming power, was now scrambling for survival. The Indomitable surged forward alongside our remaining ships, unleashing everything we had. Plasma torpedoes streaked through the void, railgun slugs punched through enemy hulls, and our fighter squadrons weaved through the chaos, picking off crippled vessels. The Hegemony's third armada, the force meant to crush humanity once and for all, was crumbling. "Sir," Ensign Harrow shouted, eyes wide, "they're retreating." I looked at the tactical display. She was right. The remaining Hegemony ships were pulling back, their formation shattered. Even their command ship, a monstrous dreadnought at the rear of their fleet, was turning away. They were running. For the first time in history, the Hegemony was retreating from humans. The bridge erupted in cheers. The ghosts of every colony they had burned, every life they had taken, roared in our hearts as we watched them flee. But I wasn't satisfied. "Negative," I said coldly. "We do not let them escape." The bridge quieted. Lieutenant Diaz turned to me, surprised. "Sir?" I met his gaze. "They'll be back, Diaz. If we let them go now, they'll rebuild, regroup, and return with 10 times the force." My voice hardened. "We finish this. Here, now." Diaz's expression shifted, a slow, dangerous smile forming. "Aye, Captain." I opened the fleet-wide comms. "All ships, pursue and annihilate." Like a pack of wolves, we fell upon the retreating fleet. The Defiance led the charge, cutting down ships before they could jump to warp. The Iron Fang and Valkyrie fired precise volleys, striking engines, preventing any escape. The final ship to fall was their command dreadnought, a towering behemoth, its hull scarred and burning, desperately trying to reach the jump point. We didn't let it. The Indomitable closed in, our railguns glowing with energy. I opened a direct channel. "High Chancellor Vrextal." My voice was steady, even. "Your empire ends today." The insectoid creature appeared on the screen, his mandibles twitching in rage. "You think you have won?" he hissed. "You think this battle means anything? The Hegemony spans thousands of systems. You are nothing but a nuisance." I leaned forward. "Then why are you running?" His mandibles clicked in fury. But before he could respond, I gave the order. Fire! The railguns unleashed their fury. The dreadnought's hull buckled under the impact, explosions rippling through its structure. For a moment, it seemed to hang in space, its massive frame defying gravity itself. Then, in a brilliant flash, it was gone. Silence filled the bridge. The battle was over. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what we had done. We had not only defied the hegemony, we had defeated them, but I knew this was only the beginning. Sir, Diaz said, his voice quieter now. What happens next? I looked out at the wreckage, at the burning remnants of an empire that had tried to break us. Now, I said. Now we take the fight to them. The Ghost Armada had revealed itself, and humanity was done hiding. The war had begun. The remnants of the hegemony's fleet were gone, scattered debris floating in the cold void, their empire humiliated. For the first time in history, humanity had struck back, not just in defiance, but in total victory. The Third Armada had been annihilated. Their High Chancellor's flagship was dust, and the galaxy had just learned a terrifying truth. Humans were not prey. We were predators. I stood at the Indomitable's bridge, watching as our fleet regrouped. We had won, but there was no time to celebrate. This was only the first battle. The hegemony would retaliate. When they returned, it wouldn't be with one fleet. It would be with everything they had. We need to move, I said. Now. Diaz nodded, already anticipating my next orders. Where? I turned to the galactic map, staring at the vast expanse of enemy-controlled space. To the heart of the hegemony. Silence filled the bridge as my officers absorbed the meaning of my words. Their homeworld? Diaz finally asked, his voice hushed. I nodded. They expect us to retreat, to run back to Earth, reinforce and hide. I glanced at the crew, meeting their gazes one by one. But we're not doing that. A slow grin spread across his face. We're taking the war to them. Excitement rippled through the bridge. For decades we had been forced to live under their rule, bending the knee to an empire that saw us as nothing more than a nuisance. Now, for the first time, we had the chance to end them. But it wouldn't be easy. The hegemony controls thousands of worlds, Ensign Harrow said, her voice careful. Even if we hit their capital, it won't end the war overnight. I nodded. True, but it will break them, their government, their morale, their belief in their own invincibility. Captain Reynolds's voice came over the fleet-wide comms. So what's the plan, Indomitable? You lead the charge, or do we have a little more subtlety in mind? I smirked. A bit of both. I pulled up the star charts, highlighting a series of systems. They think we're just some rogue insurgents, an annoyance to be crushed. They don't yet realize that humanity is done kneeling. I traced a path through the hegemony's outer colonies. We won't hit them head-on, not yet. First, we carve a path through their supply lines, burn their shipyards, cripple their infrastructure. Diaz nodded. Bleed them dry before the killing blow. Exactly. We would fight like humans always had. Dirty, relentless, and without mercy. The hegemony had the advantage in raw numbers, but they were slow, arrogant, and dependent on rigid command structures. We were unpredictable, adaptive, and we would make them afraid. I looked around the bridge, taking in the hardened expressions of my crew. None of them hesitated. Every single one of them had lost something to the hegemony. Families displaced, colonies destroyed, lives ruined. Now, they had a chance for revenge. I exhaled. Set course for the Dracos shipyards. The Dracos system was a critical manufacturing hub for the hegemony's war machine. Taking it out would cripple their fleet production, buying us time to move deeper into their territory. The engines of the Indomitable hummed as our fleet prepared for the next phase. As I looked out at the stars, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. The war had begun, and humanity was just getting started. The journey to Dracos was tense, filled with an electric anticipation that ran through every member of the fleet. We weren't just on the run, we were on the attack. For decades, humans had been forced to operate in the shadows, but now we moved with purpose, a storm cutting through the dark. The Dracos shipyards were one of the largest military production facilities in the hegemony, responsible for assembling entire battle fleets. If we could take it out, we wouldn't just cripple their war machine. We'd send a message. The hegemony wasn't invincible. "We're approaching the system," Ensign Harrow reported. "Long-range scans show heavy fortifications, orbital platforms, defense grids, automated turrets." She swallowed. "And a fleet." I stepped forward, my fists clenching. "How big?" Diaz exhaled through his teeth. "Not as large as the Third Armada, but still formidable. 2 dreadnoughts, 6 battlecruisers, and at least 20 support ships." He glanced at me. They were expecting trouble. Of course they were. After what we did at Rex's Prime, the hegemony had no doubt scrambled to protect key infrastructure. The days of catching them completely off guard were over. But that didn't mean we couldn't win. "They think we'll engage them head-on," I murmured. "A brute force assault like any other species would try." Diaz smirked. "But we're not any other species." "No," I said, a slow grin forming. "We're humans, and humans fight dirty." I turned to the fleet-wide communication. "All ships, execute Phantom Strike." Our formation shifted immediately. The Indomitable and the heavier warships pulled back, cutting their engines to minimal power, drifting in the void like debris. Meanwhile, our stealth corvettes, small, nearly undetectable ships, slipped forward, vanishing into the darkness. The hegemony fleet held its position near the shipyards, unmoving, confident. They knew we were here, but they didn't know how we would strike. That hesitation would cost them. Minutes passed. The silence was deafening. Then, suddenly, boom! Explosions erupted within the enemy fleet. The stealth corvettes had slipped past their outer defenses, planting charges on key vessels. A battlecruiser erupted into a fireball, secondary explosions ripping it apart. Another ship lost power entirely, its engines flickering before it drifted helplessly into the void. Panic spread through the hegemony fleet. That was our moment. "All ships, attack!" The Indomitable roared forward, railguns spinning up, plasma lances slicing through the dark. The Defiance followed, its heavy cannons tearing through the enemy dreadnought like paper. Fighters swarmed around the battlefield, weaving between wreckage, striking where the hegemony was weakest. Their fleet crumbled. The orbital platforms turned their guns on us. But we were ready. The Iron Fang deployed an EMP charge, sending a pulse through the enemy defenses, shorting out targeting systems. We pressed forward, smashing through what little resistance remained. Soon, the only thing left was the shipyard itself. I opened a direct channel. "This is Captain Hayes of the Indomitable. Surrender now, and you will live." A guttural snarl came through the comms. "You may win this battle, human," the hegemony commander spat, "but you cannot win the war." I leaned forward. "We'll see about that." I cut the transmission. A moment later, the Defiance unleashed its primary cannon. The Dracos shipyards, once a symbol of the hegemony's industrial might, erupted into a superheated inferno. Fire consumed the structure, sending massive chunks of debris spiraling into the planet's atmosphere below. The mission was a success. As I stood on the bridge, watching the destruction unfold, I knew one thing for certain. The war had just begun. And we were winning. The fires of the Dracos shipyards burned behind us as we slipped into deep space, engines low to avoid detection. The battle had been a decisive victory, but there was no time to celebrate. The hegemony would be furious. They would come in force, and if we stayed too long, we'd be overwhelmed. "Casualty reports?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Diaz exhaled. "We lost the Vanguard and Silver Star. Iron Fang took heavy damage but is still operational. Fighter losses were minimal. Most pilots managed to eject." I nodded. "And the enemy?" Harrow scrolled through her tactical readout. "Dracos is completely destroyed. Enemy fleet is wiped out. No survivors." She hesitated. "We intercepted a transmission before we left. The hegemony is aware of what happened. They've declared humanity an existential threat to the galactic order." A slow smirk formed on my lips. Good. For decades they had treated us as insignificant, as if we were nothing more than a minor nuisance. Now? Now they were afraid. Diaz folded his arms. "They'll come for us with everything they have." "Let them," I said, staring out into the void. "We'll take the fight to them first." The fleet drifted in the silent darkness of space, hidden amongst the asteroid fields near the remnants of Dracos. The hegemony would send scouts, trying to determine our next move. They expected us to go on the run, to scatter like prey. We weren't going to run. I brought up the galactic map, staring at the heart of the hegemony. Their core systems were still out of reach, but there were targets that would hurt them. Badly. "We strike their supply lines next," I said. "Without resources, their fleets are useless." Diaz frowned. "Do we have the numbers for that?" "No," I admitted. "Not yet." He studied me for a moment. "You have something in mind." I grinned. "We're not the only ones who hate the hegemony." The bridge fell silent as they realized what I meant. The hegemony had crushed dozens of species under their rule, ruling through fear and subjugation. But what if those species knew the hegemony could bleed? What if they knew humanity was fighting back? "We send a message," I said. "A broadcast across every pirate network, every insurgent cell, every world that's ever been under their boot." I turned to Harrow. "Let them know the hegemony is vulnerable. Let them know humanity is at war." Harrow's eyes widened. "If we do this, we'll be lighting a fuse that can't be undone." I met her gaze. "That's the point," Diaz chuckled. "Now that's the kind of war I want to fight." Harrow nodded and began transmitting. The message would spread like wildfire, rippling through the underworld of the galaxy. There would be no turning back now. I stood at the bridge, watching the stars. The war had started with a whisper. Now it was about to become a storm. The message spread faster than we could have hoped. Within days, the underworld of the galaxy was ablaze with whispers of humanity's defiance. Pirate lords, warlords, and insurgent leaders who had long lived under the hegemony's shadow now saw a chance, a real chance, to fight back. We weren't just a rogue human fleet anymore. We were the spark of a revolution. The first response came from the Vascari, an amphibious species that had once been a proud warrior culture before the hegemony crushed them. Their chieftain, Gorvak, sent us a simple message. "The enemy of my enemy is my blade. Where do you need us?" Then came the Drunkai, a reptilian race known for their brutal guerrilla warfare. They had fought the hegemony before and lost. But now they saw a second chance. More came. Small factions, pirate bands, even defectors from the hegemony's own ranks. The uprising had begun. On the bridge of the Indomitable, I stood before the holomap, now littered with new potential allies. "We've got volunteers," Diaz said. "Not all of them trustworthy, but they all hate the hegemony." "That's enough for now," I said. "We don't need loyalty. We just need chaos." Harrow scrolled through new transmissions, her eyes widening. "Sir, the hegemony is responding." She tapped a few buttons, and a chilling sight appeared on the screen. A massive fleet, unlike anything we had seen before. Hundreds of warships, all mobilizing toward the human colonies. "They're preparing a full-scale invasion," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The hegemony wasn't going to just retaliate. They were going to wipe humanity out. Diaz exhaled sharply. "They're not taking any chances this time." I clenched my jaw. We had pushed them into a corner. Now, they were coming with everything they had. "Then we don't let them reach Earth," I said. "We stop them before they get the chance." Diaz frowned. "With what? That fleet is massive." I looked back at the growing coalition of rebels and outlaws rallying behind us. With everyone. A week later, the battlefield was set. We met the hegemony in the dead void of space, far from any world, at the edges of the Andros expanse, a place filled with dense asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies, a perfect killing ground. The Indomitable sat at the center of our ragtag armada, surrounded by human warships, Vascari raiders, Drunkai strike craft, and countless other vessels that had no business being in a formal fleet. And yet, here we were. The hegemony fleet loomed before us, stretching out like an unstoppable tide. Their ships were pristine, disciplined, organized. Ours were anything but we weren't here for a fair fight. I opened the comms to the fleet. "You all know why we're here. The hegemony thought they could rule us forever, thought they could keep us afraid, thought they could crush anyone who dared to resist." I paused, letting the silence settle. Then, with a slow grin, I finished. They were wrong. A roar of agreement erupted through the comms. Then the battle began. The hegemony fleet surged forward, their disciplined formations tightening, ready to crush us under their superior firepower. But we weren't going to fight them head-on. Instead, we broke apart. The Vascari raiders slipped into the asteroid fields, using their smaller size to harass the flanks. The Drunkai launched boarding parties, their specialized ships ramming into enemy hulls and spilling warriors into the corridors. Our stealth ships darted through the chaos, planting bombs and disrupting formations. And then the Defiance entered the fray. The massive human battleship fired its primary cannon, sending a railgun slug the size of a skyscraper through the heart of an enemy dreadnought. The alien ship imploded instantly. The battle turned into pure chaos. We weren't just fighting the hegemony, we were tearing them apart. For the first time, the galaxy saw what happened when humanity was backed into a corner. For the first time, the hegemony ran. The battle ended with the remnants of their fleet retreating, shattered and humiliated. We had won. But this was only the beginning. Because now, the war wasn't just humanity's. Now the whole galaxy was rising up, and the hegemony was doomed. The war had erupted into something far greater than we had ever imagined. What started as humanity's fight for survival had now become a full-scale galactic revolution. The hegemony had ruled through fear for centuries, but now their empire was crumbling, system by system. The battle at Andros Expanse had shattered the illusion of their invincibility. Word spread faster than their damage control efforts could contain it. Across the galaxy, planets that had once bowed in submission now took up arms. Entire fleets defected. Governors rebelled. The hegemony had spent centuries crushing dissent. But they had never faced all their enemies at once, and we had made sure they did. In the war room aboard the Indomitable, the map of the galaxy no longer looked like a solid block of hegemony control. Red zones, signifying rebellion, had begun to appear across their core systems. "They're stretched thin," Diaz said, studying the latest intelligence reports. Too many uprisings, too many battles at once. They don't have enough fleets to put down every rebellion. Which means we don't stop, I said. We press. Harrow, ever the strategist, frowned. They still have enough firepower to wipe out entire planets if they get desperate. We need to be careful. I nodded. She was right. The hegemony was losing, but that made them dangerous. We need to take out their ability to make war, I said. Their shipyards, their command centers. Hit them where it hurts. That was when Reynolds, captain of the Defiance, leaned in. You're talking about their capital. The room went silent. Diaz whistled under his breath. You're not wrong. If we take their homeworld, the rest of the Empire will collapse. Harrow was skeptical. It won't be that simple? No, I admitted. It won't. The hegemony's homeworld, Zor-Vak Prime, was the most fortified planet in the known galaxy. Massive orbital defenses, an armada of their strongest ships, and planetary shields that could withstand prolonged bombardment. A frontal assault would be suicide, which was why we weren't going to fight fair. I activated the holomap, zooming in on the planet's security grid. We don't invade, I said. We infiltrate. The plan was simple in concept, impossible in execution, unless you were human. We would use our allies to stage diversions across hegemony space, forcing them to divert fleets and weaken their defenses. Then, while their attention was elsewhere, a small team would slip on to Zor-Vak Prime and take out their leadership from the inside. No prolonged war, no siege, just one decisive strike to end their rule forever. Reynolds leaned back, grinning. You are insane, I smirked. That's why it'll work. Diaz clapped his hands together. Then let's start making them bleed. The next 2 months were a storm of destruction. The Vascari hit their supply lines, destroying food production centers and fuel refineries. The Drunkai launched targeted assassinations against key commanders. Human warships ambushed reinforcements, striking from the void and disappearing before retaliation could come. The hegemony was losing control. Their forces were scrambling from system to system, trying to put out fires. But there were too many. And then the final piece fell into place. A hegemony admiral, desperate and furious, made a critical mistake. He abandoned his post at Zor-Vak Prime to reinforce another collapsing front. Their capital was vulnerable. It was time. I called my officers into the war room. This is it, I said, voice steady. This is the moment we end them. Harrow tapped at her screen, pulling up data from our spies inside the capital. The planetary shield is still active, but their command centers are operating at minimum security. If we move fast, we can take control before they even realize we're there. Diaz grinned. So, we drop in, take out their leaders, and watch the Empire crumble? I nodded. Exactly. Reynolds crossed his arms. How do we get in? I pulled up a smuggler's route we had recently acquired from a very reluctant hegemony defector. We take the ghost path, I said. It was a nearly suicidal route, a maze of asteroid fields and unstable wormholes that only the most daring or insane smugglers used. No sane warship captain would try to navigate it, which meant no one would expect us to. This is our only shot, I said. We take Zor-Vak Prime or we lose everything. No one hesitated. Diaz clapped a hand on my shoulder. Let's finish what we started. The fleet prepared for the final mission. The end of the hegemony was coming, and humanity was ready to deliver the killing blow. The journey through the ghost path was the most harrowing experience of my life. We had stripped our force down to a surgical strike team, just a handful of ships, small and fast enough to slip past patrols. The Indomitable led the way, followed by the Defiance and a few of our best stealth corvettes. Every officer, every soldier aboard knew the stakes. The ghost path was a nightmare. Unstable wormholes that could rip a ship apart, gravitational anomalies that threw navigational systems into chaos, and asteroid fields so dense that even the best pilots struggled to maneuver through them. One wrong move, and we'd be nothing but debris. But we made it. Barely. The moment we emerged from the final jump, Zorvac Prime filled our view, a massive, sprawling world of towering black spires and glowing energy grids. It was the heart of the hegemony, the center of their power. And it was vulnerable. The planetary defense fleet was still present. Several dreadnoughts, dozens of cruisers. But they weren't expecting us. Their forces were stretched thin across the galaxy, fighting the very war we had ignited. Diaz let out a low whistle as he studied the screen. "This is suicide. You know that, right?" I smirked. "Only if we fail." Reynolds' voice came over the comms. "I hope you have a plan, Indomitable, because I don't think we're talking our way out of this one." "I do," I said, "and it's just as insane as everything else we've done." The only way to take the capital wasn't from orbit. It was from inside. "We fake a crash landing," I said. "Make it look like a rogue smuggler ship losing control on approach. We sneak in under their defenses, get boots on the ground, and take the Central Command Tower." Diaz raised an eyebrow. "So we just walk into the most heavily defended city in the galaxy and kill their leaders?" "Not just walk," I said. "We bring a storm with us." I turned to Harrow. "Are the insurgents in place?" She nodded. "Confirmed. We've got cells on the surface, ready to rise up as soon as we make our move." The plan was reckless. Insane. But it would work. "Then let's end this." The Indomitable descended through the atmosphere like a meteor, fire trailing from its hull as we deliberately destabilized our engines. Hegemony defense scanners pinged us, but our false distress signal played across all frequencies. "Emergency! Mayday! Losing control!" We slammed into the outskirts of the capital, metal screeching, dust and debris exploding outward. The moment we hit the ground, the bay doors blasted open, and our forces poured out. We weren't alone. We weren't alone. Across the city, insurgents erupted into the streets. Former slaves, exiled warriors, and rebels who had been waiting for this moment. Explosions rocked the skyline as they struck military outposts, sabotaged power grids, and took control of strategic buildings. The city was falling into chaos. We moved fast. Our squad pushed through enemy lines, cutting down resistance with brutal efficiency. The hegemony had never faced ground warfare like this. Humans fought dirty, up close, and without hesitation. We reached the command tower, storming through its defenses. Hegemony guards, massive insectoid creatures, tried to hold their ground, but we cut through them. The final door stood before us, thick, reinforced, nearly impenetrable. Nearly. Reynolds slapped a breaching charge against it. "Step back!" The explosion rocked the tower, and we surged in. Inside, cowering behind security forces, was the Supreme High Chancellor of the Hegemony, Vorzal, the last true ruler of their empire. His mandibles trembled as he stared at us in disbelief. This is impossible," he hissed. I leveled my weapon at him. "This is humanity." With one shot, I ended his reign. The fall of Zorvac Prime sent shockwaves across the galaxy. The hegemony, leaderless and fractured, collapsed within weeks. Their fleets surrendered. Their worlds declared independence. Their former slaves turned on them. The war was over. Humanity had done the impossible. We had defied an empire, and we had won. As I stood on the balcony of the former hegemony capital, looking out at a city no longer ruled by fear, Diaz stepped beside me. "So," he said, smirking, "what do we do now?" I smiled. Now? We build because humanity wasn't just a survivor anymore. We were a power, and the galaxy would never forget it.